to put over the technology that's involved and what the signals might mean, I would imagine would be very, very difficult.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, well, we're on the subject of the human interfaces here, so to speak. Let's backtrack a little bit and talk about what you have done to yourself then. I mean, you have this in two steps, basically. One back in 1998, and then you did an upgrade, if you will, back in 2002. But let's backtrack to 1998 and start with that, and tell us what you did and exactly what the procedure was like and so forth.
You know, it's amazing to think it is 10 years ago now, but at that time, one has to think back to the mid-1990s. There were then various scientists, people like Ray Kurzweil, and I know Peter Cochrane, who was then head of British Telecom Research Labs in the UK, and a lot of people were saying in the future we're not going to need passports, we're not going to need keys for our cars, we're not going to need credit cards. What we'll have is a little implant that will do everything for it. Will link to the computer will know who we are from the implant that we have, and that will be the future for humankind. But nobody had actually tried it at that time. And so I did. I had a radio frequency identification device implanted by my doctor in my left arm, and we tried to see what we could do with it, which we were able, within my department, we had various pickup points and a computer controlling various systems in the department. So when I walked towards my laboratory, the computer, via the implant, the computer knew it was me, so it opened the door for me. Down the corridor, it switched on lights for me. Coming through the front door, it said, "Hello, Professor Warwick," as I came in, because it knew it was me.
Right.
And I guess what we were doing was just using that to demonstrate at the time what was possible, and hopefully people's imagination could see where to take it from there. But it was amazing at the time. There was quite a bit of interest from the outside world, and that was tremendously exciting. Now I think a lot of people have got cats or dogs that have got a similar type, a smaller version, but a similar type of implant that they use for identification. There are various nightclubs. There's some called the Bayer Beach Club. There's one in Barcelona, one in Rotterdam, and you can get an implant of this type, and then you don't need to pay for your drinks with cash. You can get your drinks charged to your implant, as it were. It's actually to your bank account, but you use your implant, which is scanned. And even in the US, United States, some people with diabetes, some people with epilepsy have an implant of this type, and it gives an indication of the medication they need when they go into hospital. So it's a bit like a medical record that is implanted. So there's quite a few examples, other examples in security. I think in Mexico, some of the members of the government have an implant of this type. So lots of examples where people now actually use the implant of this type in an actual practical way. But back in 1998, as far as I'm aware, then I was the first human to actually try it out.
Interesting, and you're absolutely right. There are a lot of places that this begins to pop up on now, and I did not know that it was a standard, if you will, RFID or radio frequency identification tag that you embedded, if you will. But can this?
Well, that was the one in 1998. Yes.
Right, and can this both send and receive, or is this simply a set of a string of numbers within that identifies this tag, and then this tag enables the surrounding system to pick up on this number? Is that how it works? Yes, it doesn't. The signals don't get changed, and the only way you can change the signals is externally. You can reprogram the device to send out a different code. But essentially, all that happens normally is that the coil within the implant or within the device is energized, and the device then transmits out a particular sequence of numbers which you can use for identification purposes, or, as I said, with the diabetes patients, that it gives an indication this medication is needed, how much of a particular medication to use. So
depends what you're using for, but an identification indication signal that identifies you or the device uniquely is the simplest thing to do. But it's not affected, not changed by what's going on in your body, and when any signals are passed down to it, whether to energize it or to change the code, that's not affecting what's going on in your body. So it's just sitting inside your body. But I think one thing to say on this, what I did find, which was quite surprising at the time, having an implant like that, mentally, very quickly, you regard it as being part of you. It's you. It's part of your body. And this is very different to having something on the outside. If you're wearing glasses or you have a ring or a watch, it's external. It's not you. But once you put things in your body, mentally, very quickly you regard it as being you. It's part of you. And this is the same. People that have a heart pacemaker, or people that have a cochlear implant in their ear, or people that have artificial hips. In each case, when you talk to somebody, they'll say, yeah, this is me. Mentally, they regard it as being them. So although this implant, it was just a dormant thing, unless it was actually activated, mentally, I felt it was me.
Interesting. And so what happened there? I mean, did you take this upon yourself, so to speak, to become a test person / guinea pig for the university's behalf? Was that the case here?
Yeah, well, I guess so, yes. I wanted to actually go for it myself and try it out. But also, I mean, when you do something for the first time, you're not really sure exactly what's going to happen. You think it's going to be all right, but you don't know. Yeah. And what we used wasn't really supposed to be for putting an implant, and it could easily have gone wrong. It was in a little glass tube, and the doctor that we were working with said, oh, we've got to sterilize it before we put it into your body. So the first one we tried, we put one in as you do, a bit like school children, I guess. We put one in some boiling water, 100 degrees centigrade or whatever, and tried to sterilize it by boiling it. And what happened is it exploded. It just blew, and we had big pieces of electronics all over the place.
Oh my.
So the one that we used was put into an oven, and I think it got heated up to about 80 degrees centigrade, and the doctor said, oh, that's going to have to do. It should be all right. But it always was a bit of a problem. If somebody had hit it, the glass could have smashed, and there could have been little bits of electronics floating around my body. And then things like whether the implant would migrate and whether the body would try and reject it, throw it out. These were all questions that we didn't really know the answer to at that time.
Right, but in regards to your body rejecting it, has that been a case? Do you have to take something in order to prevent this?
For that one, no. I mean, I simply taking some antibiotics maybe. The second implant, which we haven't talked about yet, which was back in 2002, that was a lot more serious, and that one was in for just over 3 months. But quite the converse, I took a few antibiotics to start with, but what we found with that one was that my body, tissues within my body grew round the implant, pulling it into place. So far from my body rejecting the implant, quite the opposite happened. It very much accepted it and was pulling it in, making sure it actually worked okay, as it were.
And so, do I understand things correctly when you say that you don't have it in your body anymore, the second implant?
That's right, oh, yes. No, it was very much just an experiment, as I said, for just over 3 months. I think I've probably still got some wires left in my arm. The surgeons removed most of what there was, but there's still a few wires left in. But part of the experiment was to see what had happened to the implant, how had the body tissue interacted with the spikes, with the electrodes, and how did the electrodes interact with my body, but what state was the implant in when it got removed?
So, I mean, that's very interesting. And tell us a little bit more about the second implant. What was the difference between this and the first one, and could it do more, so to speak?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was very, very different. second one, it looked a little bit like a hairbrush, but it was very, very small. 100 electrodes, 100 spikes. Each spike was 1.5 millimeters long, and this was fired into the median nerves in my left arm. Now, the median nerves, the whole bunch of nerve fibers, which take signals down to your hand to move your thumb and the main fingers, and take sensory signals back up to your brain. And what we did was a bit like putting an electric plug in a socket, but instead of having 2 pins or 3 pins, as an electric plug has, this had 100 pins, and there was no socket. This was fired into my nervous system. So what the surgeons did was remove some of the myelin sheath. This is the outer covering on the nerve fibers for protection. Removed some of that, and then literally hammered this 100 electrodes into my nervous system. And then I had wires which came from the electrodes coming out of my arm and onto a little contact set, a sort of terminal set, little gold terminals. So,
right.
And then that was all stitched up in place. So for just over 3 months, I had this plug with 100 electrodes in my nervous system, and then wires coming out of my arm, and we could plug these into the computer. And either when I moved my hand, neural signals, brain signals, we could send off to the computer and do things with them, like switch on lights, for example. But also we could send signals down from the computer onto my nervous system to stimulate my brain.
Really?
And it took about 6 weeks for my brain to learn to recognize those pulses. But once that had happened, then we could do a whole range of experiments. So for just over 3 months, I had this plug socket fitted into my nervous system, which allowed us to communicate signals to my nervous system, to my brain, but also for us to send neural signals out to operate different pieces of technology.
So could you operate this by thought then?
Well, the answer is not really, but yes.
Right.
Because my neural signals down my nervous system, they would move my hand. If I had been paralyzed, as some people are, exactly the same neural signals, they wouldn't move anything, but they're still generated. If I thought about moving, there would be the same signals. And it was those signals, the neural signals, that we used to operate technology or whatever. We got them to switch on lights, to drive a wheelchair around. For the hospital that we were working with, they were looking to assess this technology. So for somebody who was paralyzed, for somebody who had a spinal injury, let's say, and they couldn't move, could this technology, this implant, be put into their brain so when they thought about moving, the same signals that we were picking up for me, we could use those signals to drive them around in a wheelchair, so they could operate themselves in a wheelchair. They could drive themselves, which obviously would be very useful. It would save a lot of time and effort from people pushing them around. They could sort it out for themselves. So effectively, yeah, it was my neural signals, it was my brain signals we were using, but I was moving my hand to generate the signals, because that's what happens when I try and move my hand. Actually, my signals move my hand. If I was paralyzed, they wouldn't.
And so what about the other way around? You said that from the computer or from this central interface, then you could send signals into your body and to your brain. Tell us a little bit more about that. How did that work?
Yes, well, that took 6 weeks for my brain. It took about 2 weeks before we got signals in that my brain could understand. I mean, essentially doing that. No one had done anything like that before, so there was no book that we could go and see